Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. The new year means new cuts and increases in BC. We mean taxes. The Premier has promised a middle income tax reduction, while a home flipping tax is now in place, and the carbon tax is set to rise in April. What will those measures do for you? And in our second half hour, it is a Minter Friday. Master Gardener Brian Minter will join us with winter tips and take your calls and emails. I'm Dan Burritt, in for Michelle Elliott. Welcome to a Friday edition of BC Today. Hello to everyone watching us on TV and live stream and listening to us on radio. You can call us now on our top story. What will BC's new tax cuts and increases do for you? Our number is 604-669-3733 in Metro Vancouver, across our great big province. Call us at 1-800-825-5950, or you can hit pound 690 on your cell. Please be pulled over or hands-free when you do that, or you can type us out an email, bctoday@cbc.ca. The new year is bringing new housing initiatives from the province. Among them, the home flipping tax is now in effect. Non-exempt property owners who sell homes within 2 years of purchase will pay a 20% levy. Meanwhile, renters can now claim up to $400 a year off their taxes if their income is under $83,000. And the province says changes to the homeowner grant means it will now cover people with property worth up to $2,175,000. Amid all that, the carbon tax is set to rise in the spring, and the Premier is touting a middle-class tax cut. We're asking you about these policies today. Are these the right changes? Are there other measures you think the province ought to introduce? And how will these policies affect you? Give us a call now, 1-800-825-5950. In Metro Vancouver, the number is 604-669-3733. Again, on your cell, pound 690, and email us bctoday@cbc.ca. I'm joined by two guests for this segment. Brendon Ogmundson is the chief economist for the BC Real Estate Association, and Peter Waldkirch is director with Abundant Housing Vancouver. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
Brendon, I'm going to start with you. What do you think of the new home flipping tax coming into effect?
I think it's a tax that isn't going to have much of an effect if you understand how much flipping actually happens in the BC market. If you look at Bank of Canada data, they do it within a year, so not the 2 years that the provincial government has designated, but within a year, there's only about 2 to 3% of transactions that are purchased and sold within 1 year. Within 6 months, which is probably the most likely, what's actual flipping activity, people looking to profit off of very short-term changes in the market, is about 1.5%. Almost everyone that sells within 2 years, other than those, maybe 1.5%, are going to be exempt for whatever reason, change in life circumstances or other reasons that are on the exempt list. So it's going to affect very few transactions, have very little impact on affordability, and might actually have some unintended consequences for the supply of listings because it's retroactive. So if you had bought within the past year and you try and sell this year, you could be subject to the flipping tax.
Peter, what about you? What do you think of this new home flipping tax?
Well, I think the thing to remember is that, things like speculation and flipping, they're not the cause of our housing crisis, of our deep unaffordability crisis. They're a symptom of it. What causes our housing crisis is a severe shortage of housing. In major cities like Vancouver, we just don't have enough homes. That's what makes things like speculation and flipping attracting to investors. People aren't doing stuff like that for things, they only do that when they think prices are going to keep on going up. So this, I think, is a reasonable step for the government to take because there is a lot of public concern about that. So it does address that, but it doesn't address the underlying cause of housing unaffordability, which is one of the major drivers of unaffordability across the board in our society. That will take taking serious steps to increase our housing supply and address our housing shortage.
So is it in that case, and I'm going to jump back to you, Brendon, about the unintended consequences. Before we do that, Peter, to your point around simply boosting housing stock, we have heard from experts, for example, Tom Davidoff and others, saying that there is supply that's coming online. Certainly, though, for a lot of people, it's never fast enough, is it? So where are we in terms of getting that supply onto the market?
Yeah, that's actually absolutely a great point. And that's one of the reasons why I think, for example, measures to address housing affordability now are urgent because it will take time for housing to be built, especially in the city of Vancouver, where it's almost impossible to build new housing because of the very high levels of just how difficult the city makes it to build housing. It takes, I started getting involved in housing advocacy 6 or 7 years ago now, and buildings that I was first advocating for 6 or 7 years ago still aren't built. So it takes time. So that's why measures like putting money into people's pockets ASAP, building non-market housing ASAP for people who need it the most are important and urgent steps. But the fundamental causes will take a real rethinking of how we build housing in our society to make sure that there is enough housing for everybody, because right now that's just not the case.
Brendon, I saw you nodding along to some of what Peter was saying there. Can we go back to the unintended consequences you think may come from this flipping tax?
Sure, and it's kind of related to supply as well. In this case, what's available to buy in the market rather than what we're building in the future. But I've already heard from realtors that I talk to at the start of every month about how their markets are going. I've already heard from realtors saying they have clients that we're going to list and now aren't going to list because of the flipping tax. Not even necessarily because paying the tax is so onerous. It's sort of there's not a lot of profits to be had over the past 2 years just because prices have been really flat in most markets. But also, I'm kind of curious about how much auditing work is going to be done by the government. The administrative costs of this tax must be enormous. Not only do you have to check that all of the sort of expenses that you can deduct for the tax are legitimate, but you also have to check on well, did you actually get married this year? Do you have a legitimate reason to be on this exempt list? All that takes a costly kind of administrative programs for the government. So there's just a lot of very clunky ways this tax works. The other, I think, is there's already a 1-year anti-flipping tax from the federal government. It's not clear to me who gets paid first. If you have to pay the federal government or the provincial government first, can you deduct the anti-flipping tax from your profit on a flip in BC? So a lot of real uncertainty again for a tax that really doesn't do anything for affordability.
We're talking housing policy, taxes coming in this year, tax breaks coming in for other parts of BC and certain British Columbians. If you'd like to join the conversation, call us now, 1-800-825-5950. Our number in Metro Vancouver, 604-669-3733. You can email us, bctoday@cbc.ca, or give us a call on your cell phone, pound 690. Brendon, back to you for a moment. BC Assessment published its 2024 data yesterday. Very little change year over year. I think the largest fluctuations, if memory serves, were in, at least in Burnaby, for example, 4% increase. What's your view on where prices are right now?
Yeah, prices really across every market in BC, without some exceptions, have been flat since about the middle of 2023. We saw a bit of an increase when the Bank of Canada had paused at the start of 2023 and sales started to pick up. Then they started to raise rates again in June of 2023, and since then prices have barely moved. So, which is good. We don't want prices really accelerating. We had about 10 years worth of price appreciation in a lot of markets in 1 year during the pandemic. So flat pricing is good. For us to kind of stay at pretty level prices, though, as Peter was saying, we need a lot more supply. Eventually demand is going to pick back up. And the risk is always that demand picks up into an undersupplied market, and we get the really unhealthy price accelerations that we've seen too many of over the past 2 decades.
Peter, we know that the province has put in quotas for certain communities around housing, social housing in particular, and it's swung a rather big hammer on some of those communities. For example, West Vancouver to say, get your act together or we'll do it for you. Is it just the province, or for example, sorry, you said the city that where we can see some of these delays? Is it just municipalities, local governments, or are there other factors at play here?
Well, look, of course, there's a lot of factors that go into housing. There's macroeconomics, there's all sorts of things. But the fundamental issue is if there's not enough housing for everybody, you're going to have dysfunctions. You're going to have things like overcrowding. You're going to have high prices. You're going to have all sorts of horrible situations where people, they can't start their families. They can't move out and pursue their life goals or find the right job for them because there just isn't enough housing. So that sort of drives all these other dysfunctions we see in the housing market. And the cities absolutely bear primary responsibility for this. Because I think we have to be very upfront that cities historically have been a major part of the problem and the reason why we have a housing crisis in the first place. About 100 years ago, we gave basically complete control over land use to cities. That's through their zoning powers and being able to determine what can be built where. And we now have firm evidence that was a gigantic disaster. We have a housing crisis as a result of these sorts of the abuse of this power that cities have had, where they've made it simply impossible for there to be enough housing to be built. We know, for example, in Vancouver, that there is a massive shortage of housing, that we are at least about 150,000 homes short of how many homes there need to be in the city in order for there to be a reasonable level of sort of affordability. That is a huge amount, and that's cities need to bear some of the responsibility. Now, the province absolutely has a role in supervising the cities, and for too long, the province basically took a hands-off approach to housing. It's very good news that the province is finally changing their tune with that and has started to intervene more directly, because we have seen what happens when we give cities unsupervised, unregulated control over land use. They break the system. They make it so there's not enough housing for everybody. So the province has an important role in stepping in and correcting those mistakes.
Let's go to Bob calling us from Princeton. Bob, what do you make of the tax and housing policies that are coming in this year?
The housing taxes are going unreal, but the housing policy, you look on TV and you see these new subdivisions. They're all these huge houses. Everybody's broke in the province, and you see these subdivisions. Look at the houses. They're $1 million, like wartime houses, build small houses that people can afford. I know the land probably, look at Canada, look at British Columbia. We've got all kinds of land, not used. Put small houses in that people can afford,
Yeah. And Bob, can I ask, what's the housing situation in Princeton?
Not worth the heck,
All right.
We're as usual, we're taxed to death and nothing is done. It's probably the same everywhere.
Yeah. Bob, appreciate your call. Thanks very much. Let's go to Sarah in South Surrey. Sarah, what do you make of the housing initiatives and tax increases and cuts coming in this year?
So this is the problem with such a complex and compounded and long-term problem. Once governments acknowledge that there's a problem, then they have to do something about it. But this is a new territory for us, acknowledging it, after 17 years of BC Liberals. So now with these sort of new programs coming and these tentative kind of moves, obviously I'm for ones that work, but none of us can tell what is going to work until it is tried. And I fear that the political, payback for things that don't go perfectly the first time could send us right back to a sort of wild, wild west situation. But what I was interested in and why I called in was because I've been tracking this quite closely. I used to work on a campaign tracking large public private equity firms, BlackRock specifically, Vanguard and State Street. And we, I believe, are all aware that they are on a buying spree in North America, not just Canada, maybe not as much as has been reported. But for me, that sort of exemplifies the Metro Vancouver and at this point, the Canadian market is, it's not people necessarily from abroad. It's not, there are people, and I used to go to open houses in Vancouver, and realtors would be looking at buying 6 to 10 condos. Now we've got something like 43% of, I believe it's Cole Harbor condos are owned by these major conglomerates, and they've got so much capital to push around. It's going to, I forget what the term is, but in economics, when a factor comes in and it, distorts the market. So if you've got less demand because people are so pushed by inflation, or there's not, you've got these huge sharks coming in who can just sort of scoop the krill. And so I am not necessarily a huge proponent of more supply, more supply, more supply. For me, that's like going to a casino and everybody's gambling with the chips, but okay, so new houses become chips and they take on the exact same characteristics as every other overpriced build going on in the city. So I'd be interested in hearing from your panelists about their thoughts on that kind of phenomenon that's been happening more and more in the last few years.
Yep. Thank you, Sarah. We're going to get to the rest of the calls. If I can quickly ask Peter and Brendon. Peter, to you first. What do you make of what Sarah said?
Well, look, if you read, this isn't a big conspiracy or secret. If you read the annual reports of large institutional investors, they consistently say the biggest threat to their business model is increased supply, because that's the shortage is what makes it worth investing in, what makes it worth speculating on. They are betting. And so far, historically, they've been betting correctly that price is going to keep on going up because cities are not going to allow enough housing to be built. This benefits existing homeowners, and it benefits investors like that. It hurts average people who are looking for homes. It hurts young people who are trying to start families. And so again, if just read their annual reports, they are perfectly upfront that increased supply is the biggest threat to their sort of model of investment.
Brendon, what do you make of what Sarah was positing there?
I think that issue of corporations or private equity buying up homes is a lot more prevalent in the United States, not very much at all in BC, at least, or in Vancouver, because it's a pretty bad deal for, it's very expensive and rents are pretty low and it's very regulated and it's pretty difficult being a landlord. So it's not super attractive for them to invest in Vancouver that way. Second thing, though, is if the province wants to build about 600,000 units of new housing over the next decade, and to do so means attracting somewhere probably between $200 and $300 billion of investment, whether that's pre-sale condos or investments by REITs and other corporations that are going to build purpose-built housing. We can't we can't build 600,000 units without a lot of capital being attracted into the province. And right now, it's pretty unattractive to invest in housing because of all of our taxes and regulations. So we got to figure that out in the next decade if we're going to be able to actually get all that construction done.
And Brendon, I have an email that is pushing back a little bit on you. If I could ask, Maureen in Nanaimo writes, I'd like to challenge the real estate representatives' claim that it's only a small percentage of homes that are flipped by developers and people who have contributed to the financializing of our housing supply. I'm interested to know how this stands up to specific markets like Vancouver and others where we've seen significant increases in value well above the affordability mark for first-time home buyers. I'm going to have it abridged there. Brendon, quickly, what do you think?
Yeah, if you look at Bank of Canada's data about flipping in Vancouver and Victoria, it's low. It's below 3% for the last year. So it doesn't happen as much as people think. And it's really, like Peter was saying, a symptom. Markets get out of balance when we have not enough supply and there's some kind of demand shock like we've had in the past. Rates get really low, whatever it is, the economy picks up. Prices start to accelerate because there's not enough supply, and then you get speculators coming to the market, and that does add some fuel, but they're not there if we have adequate supply. So the way to prevent flipping and speculation is to have enough supply of homes.
Okay, we've got to go through some calls now. Marie joins us from Vancouver Island. Marie, what do you make of what you're hearing?
Well, there's three major problems that I see. One, there's no discussion about seniors housing. There's no discussion about owner occupancy eviction, which is just crap. So let me give you a scenario. I had a 3-year lease in a lovely little cottage, but when my lease was up, the owners came to me and said, in order for you to stay, you need to pay 50% more a month, or you got to go because we're selling our property and we need it to look good on paper. and you either pay 50% more. Well, my wage hadn't gone up in 10 years, so that wasn't going to happen because I live on a very tight budget. And then I tried to find accommodation in the area where I was living, and I couldn't. I now live an hour away in a smaller rural area, but even there, I found a place. I lived there for 18 months, and then I was evicted again for owner occupancy. The owner wanted to move his son in. Well, the son never moved in, and the house is still sitting empty almost 2 years later. The owner occupancy eviction, only 6 months for them to be in there is not long enough to deter that. The other thing that
Marie, I'm so sorry to cut. Marie, forgive me. We have a few other calls. I'm so sorry. We really appreciate you explaining what is another problem. And I see our colleagues, guests nodding along. I want to get to Dean in Richmond quickly. Dean, from Victoria. What's your situation?
Well, first of all, an individual cannot compete against real estate investment trust funds. They're buying up all the low income or the low housing in the country, right across North America, right around the world. They're doing it because it makes them money.
Dean, I'm going to shut up. I'm sorry, Dean. I'm sorry. I've got to get to another call. Forgive me. I appreciate you bringing that point up. We're going to end our last call with Rick in North Delta. Rick, what do you make of some of the housing initiatives? Rick, are you there? I'm sorry about that. We're closing in on the last few moments we have. Peter, I'll go to. We'll ask for a last comment from both of you. Peter, we talked about supply. If I can get you quickly on, what about dedicated social and seniors housing? Where are we at with that, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. The current government has made quite high levels of investment in social nonprofit housing, which is absolutely key because there are people for whom their housing situation is they need immediate help and they need the urgent help. And there's no substitute for that for the government directly investing in non-market housing.
Peter, I'm so sorry. I need to jump in. We are right out of time. Peter Waldkirch with Abundant Housing and Brendon Ogmundson with the BC Real Estate Association. Thank you for joining us. That got very busy. You're good sports. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
It's 12:28. This is BC Today. Now, as we've been discussing, BC ushered in the new year with a new home flipping tax. But say you're an owner who needs to sell a newly bought property for extenuating circumstances. What happens then? That's what Early Edition host Stephen Quinn asked UBC Associate Professor Tom Davidoff.
Any chance of anybody, innocent bystanders getting caught in this, which is, I buy a home with every intention of living in it for a good long time and, my spouse or partner dies or, I lose a job or I have to relocate or, I run into serious financial trouble and can no longer afford to maintain it. I mean, are there any, safeties built in for any of those circumstances?
Yeah, the important one is that if you live in the unit, if it's your primary residence, you get a $20,000 credit, up to $20,000, I imagine, if you live there for the whole 2 years. So, if your property, you buy a place for $1 million and it goes up by $100,000, you owe a $20,000 tax if you've sold it within a year for that life reason you mentioned. But you've got a $20,000 credit if it was a residence. So, you buy a $2 million place, it goes up $200,000. You have to give up $20,000 to gain, but on the other hand, in that scenario, you're up $200,000 to offset the personal tragedy you've suffered.
This is BC Today on CBC. We're on Radio 1, CBC Television, and live streaming on our website, cbc.ca/BC, on YouTube at CBC Vancouver, and the CBC News app. Coming up, calling all gardeners and Green Thumb's master gardener, Brian Minter, is here to answer your questions. Coming up, we're calling all gardeners and Green Thumbs. Even though it's winter, Master Gardener Brian Minter is going to be here to answer your questions and maybe adding a pop of color to your garden. That's after this CBC News Update with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. The RCMP say a woman is dead after she was struck by a train in Chilliwack early this morning. Officers responded to a report of a pedestrian struck near the Yale Road overpass after 3 o'clock. The woman has not been identified. Kelowna RCMP say a man has been charged with child pornography offences after an international investigation. The Integrated Child Exploitation Unit says it worked with law enforcement across several countries. The 46-year-old man remains in custody and is scheduled to appear in a Kelowna court today on charges of possession of child pornography and luring a child. And the RCMP now say a fire at a Duncan school New Year's Eve is suspicious. It happened at the back of Alexander Elementary School and damaged the back pod, but not the main building. Officials say the school will open for students on Monday. And now the forecast. A snowfall warning is in effect for eastern sections of the Fraser Valley. On the north coast, a mix of sun and cloud this afternoon with a high of 3. Highs around -20 and mainly sunny in the Peace. In the central interior, mainly cloudy with a high of 12 degrees. Highs around 0 with some snow in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, snow with a high of 0 as well. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria and the Fraser Valley, periods of rain this afternoon with highs around 6. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zimmerman, and thanks for joining us on CBC Radio 1, television, and live streaming on the CBC News app, cbc.ca/BC, and of course, our CBC Vancouver YouTube page. Our friends at On the Coast have a great show coming up later today. They're covering some of the excitement happening this weekend. Yes, it's Friday. What's coming up, Gloria Makarenko?
Hello there, Dan. It's Gloria Makarenko here, and I would love if you can join us this afternoon for On the Coast. You know, the Golden Globes, they're coming up this weekend. We have reviewed all of the films in case you haven't had time to do that. So do tune in. We're going to tell you everything you need to know ahead of those awards. Also, the Nikkei National Museum is celebrating Japanese New Year's this weekend here in Vancouver and Burnaby. This event is going to include New Year's calligraphy, some classic Japanese board games as well. So we'll take you through that this afternoon. I hope you can join us between 3 and 6.
Sounds like a plan, Gloria. Thanks very much. And you can hear On the Coast on CBC Radio 1 in Metro Vancouver and anywhere on the CBC News app. It is Friday. That means we're calling all green thumbs and gardening enthusiasts. BC Today's gardening columnist Brian Minter is here to take your questions about all things green. Again, call us 1-800-825-5950 across Metro Vancouver, 669-3733, or hit pound 690 and email us bctoday@cbc.ca. And we already have calls in. No shock. Brian, good to see you. Happy New Year. Today, we want to help people add apparently a pop of color in these cold months. Is that right?
Oh, Dan, and hi, Happy New Year, by the way. But, you know, the thing is, folks don't realize that we live in part of the world where you can have color year round. And after all the lights and the glimmer and get-togethers and so on of the Christmas holiday season, now we're into the dark part, the cold part of the year. And Dan, there's nothing more special than going out or looking through your window and seeing an array of color at this time of year. And there's so many wonderful plants. And Dan, just for an example, I'm going to pull a branch down here.
Oh, yeah.
This is a winter flowering honeysuckle and fragrant like you wouldn't absolutely believe. It's almost hardy to zone 5, which is the Okanagan, and but it flowers only in winter. And if you have one of these in your garden right now, two things. Number one is you get to enjoy the color, which is amazing because there's so many other plants as well. But the fragrance, the perfume is out of this world. And Dan, when we get 10 degrees or more Celsius, a lot of pollinators are out looking for nectar and pollen. It's been a long fall so far for them. And having these plants in your garden is great. But even more important, the Anna's hummingbird is looking for nectar. And a lot of the camellias that flower in wintertime, and there's a special variety of Mahonia or Oregon grape called Winter Sun that's in flower. Oh my gosh, they're all over this thing like a dirty shirt. So for many different reasons, it's great to have. Now, Dan, just very quickly here, some plants are evergreen, like the beautiful winter flowering heathers, which are bee heaven, by the way, a little bit later. The winter flowering jasmine is a yellow, very soft perfume. You could pick that and bring it inside. We mentioned the camellias, which are so great, but these are the winter flowering camellias, the sasanquas, that flower in sequence. And that's a nice thing. They don't flower all at once. And because it's a cooler time of year, they flower for weeks and weeks, in some cases months, which is absolutely so nice to be able to enjoy. So once you have these in your garden, and by the way, if you do want to pick one up and put in your garden, choose the warmest spot. The last 2 winters we've had have not been nice. So when we do put plants in for winter color and enjoyment, put them in a protected spot. That's really very important. But the Chinese witch hazels are just starting to pop open. They have spidery flowers in yellows and reds and oranges, which are great. The beautiful, we showed you the honeysuckle with the fragrance. Probably the best one of all is the Viburnum Pink Dawn. And Dan, it has pink flowers that open up in sequence, and if we get a cold spell, the flowers will simply freeze off, but more are waiting. So this thing will flower for 6 months. It's absolutely amazing in terms of beautiful color. So just a note, we need a little bit of lift in our gardens this time of year. These are hardy, reliable plants that come back year after year. Both nice for us to enjoy, nice to pick and bring inside your home for cut flowers, which is now a big thing, but also the pollinators and the hummingbirds. So multi-purpose in terms of having these great plants to enjoy in your garden year after year.
Love it. Let's go to the calls. Jeremy and Nelson, whose ficus has lost its focus. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Hey, Brian.
Hi.
First-time caller, long-time listener.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, so I got about, it's probably 15 years old. It's about, 7 feet tall. It's in a large pot in the corner of my house, and it's lost probably, I'm going to say, 75% of its leaves, if not more.
Jeremy, it's not unusual. The leaves will come back if you do a couple of things. Number one is, and by the way, the holiday season is the worst thing for plants indoors. It gets, we warm up the place, the fireplace is going, everything that plants don't like, seriously. So if you can please move the plant near a cool window, that's the most important thing. They need to have light, and more light than they're getting right now. Second thing is they really don't want too much water. They want to be kept just barely moist, and that's really the secret. Getting too wet, they don't dry out this time of year, and then the roots start to get in trouble, and that's where things go backwards. So just keep it moist. And the third thing I'd like you to do is, if you can get a mister bottle with warm water, and every morning and every night, if you have the time, and just spray the foliage. Try and get the humidity back up around the plant. Now, the good news is, Jeremy, we're getting about a minute of light every day, so our light is improving by 7 minutes a week, and that's helping. But so cool window, lots of light. If you want to add, any type of other lighting, like LED lighting and so on around it, there's all kinds of plugs you can put in these days. But just patience, and as the weather improves and the humidity improves around the plant, Jeremy, it'll take about, I would say, 2 or 3 months for that to get back fully, but I expect that it will. No, you should have no problems. Just remember not to overwater.
Thanks for your call, Jeremy. We
really
appreciate it.
that.
Thank you for joining us. Happy New Year. All the best with the ficus. Carol joins us from Bella Coola. Go ahead, Carol.
Oh, hi there. Thanks for taking my call. I've enjoyed the talk about winter color, and I have some small Erica heather plants that I put in the garden about 10 years ago. And I've just had some trouble on the particularly harsh winters. I've lost some of the plants. And they are in not a great protected area because there's a retaining wall next to the driveway, and the plants are up in that bed. So
Carol,
anyway.
if I could just mention one thing, and thank you for putting that color in there, but you're right, the last 2 years have been very hard. If you're planting, and this is so important for all the listeners who love winter heather, there are Mediterranean types, which are basically not as hardy as the Erica carneas. The Erica carneas is a huge family of the hardiest of the varieties of winter flowering heather, the Ericas. So when you're buying them, if you're not sure, ask. But if you get the Erica carneas, they will take those bad winters with no problem at all, whereas the other ones, as you can see, probably didn't do very well.
Okay. Well,
Carol, I apologize. I have to jump in. We have to keep it to one question, unfortunately. We have some more calls on the line. We do appreciate it. Linda is joining us from Campbell River. Linda, what's your question for Brian?
My question is, do you get a certain amount of saffron from all crocuses, or is it only my girlfriend sent me some that do give you, they're doing good, fall blooming crocuses.
Yeah, Linda, that's a good question. We've got all the good questions here, but it's specifically the Crocus sativus, and that is the saffron crocus. And before the flood in the Fraser Valley a few years ago that just wiped out virtually everything in the whole Sumas Flats area, there was a grower who was successfully growing. They're a little bit hard to grow, the saffron crocus in some scale. I don't know if he's back doing that right now, but it is a Crocus sativus. They're only available usually in August or coming into September. All garden places carry them. And but they are that's what you plant, and then of course they bloom in the fall and the autumn. That's when you actually can get the saffron, and it takes 1,000 little anthers to get 1 ounce of saffron, so you need a bunch of them. But any questions about that at all, Linda?
That's one. So what? Okay, so if I was to put some of the other ones in, is it poison or anything?
No, they're not. That's a good question. Yeah, no, to my knowledge, there's no poisonous part of the crocus, which is just absolutely fine. But you need, if you want to get the true saffron, which people absolutely love, you have to get the Crocus sativus, and that'll be available in August, September in virtually every garden store.
Linda,
that's what she sent me, and they're growing and they're beautiful.
Sorry to interrupt you there, Linda. Thanks so much for calling. We're going to jump to a few more calls here. Siobhan is joining us from Janelle, just south of Castlegar, if I have that right. Go ahead, Siobhan.
Hi. Thanks so much, you guys. I'm not a gardener, but we have 3 Christmas, but I absolutely love yours is the only information that I trust, Brian Minter, so thank you. We have 3 Christmas cactus, and for a non-gardener, whatever we've been doing, which is the most simple thing in the world, is just watering them maybe once a week, keeping them, just when they're really dry, we water them and water them more often when they're in full bloom. They are the most spectacular. They just bloom so beautifully all at the same time, many times throughout the year. By end last summer, they started changing, and they have become really thin, and the leaves aren't full. They're really flimsy. They're not doing well, and I don't know what to do.
Yeah, good question, Siobhan. And by the way, they are a rainforest cacti, which is always important to remember. So they want to be just moist, not sobbing wet, just moist, and they don't want to be as dry as a cactus. And you mist them to get. They love the humidity. They come from around 200 miles. Yeah, misting with warm water. They come from about 200 miles from Sao Paulo, Brazil, is where they originate. But here's one thing to keep in mind for everyone here. It's the Schulenburgia is what they are. Truncata is the one we normally have, and that's a Thanksgiving cactus. When we talk about the American Thanksgiving time is when they bloom in November. And then there's the Schulenburgia bridgesii, and that is a lot of our grandmothers, Siobhan, had the bridgesii variety. That's the one that blooms, the only one that blooms right at Christmas. It's sort of a pinky red, beautiful variety, and it has very smooth leaves as opposed to the crab-like leaves of the one we all call the Christmas cactus. So just so you know. But at this point here, Great question. Very quickly, I would wait until we get into longer days, and that's going to be sometime, I would say, late March, early April. And then if you don't mind, I'd like you to prune the plant right back. All your plants, prune them back. I would say about a third. And you can take some of those tips and root them in small pots, put 2 or 3 in a small pot, and they root quite easily. But then I need you to start feeding it. Feeding it with 20, 20, 20 is the best one, because if you do that once a week, they get lots of light, which is very, very important, but you'll see the vigor coming back. And it's all because we basically look after them, but we don't feed them enough. So during the vegetative time, which is going to be from April right through until, I would say, probably August, we feed them once a week. They'll be big and vigorous. But the secret, too, is to put them outside. I would say getting into August, September, the cool night temperatures will allow them to bloom earlier. And because they need temperatures in the 10, 15 degrees Celsius range for the buds to be able to set. So if you feed them and put them outside to trick them into bloom a little bit earlier, and get both varieties of these zygocactus, you'll enjoy them in the late fall, and you'll enjoy them for Christmas as well.
Siobhan, thank you so much for calling. We really appreciate it. Happy New Year. Best of luck with the cacti, my bad. Nancy is writing a question by email to you, Brian. She says, I successfully grew several Cape gooseberry plants this year from seed. They produced a number of berries we enjoyed. We brought one plant in a pot inside in the fall to enjoy more of the berries. The plant continues to live inside, no more berries though, and I wonder if it will survive to be put outside again in the spring or summer.
Yeah, and they need to be outside for sure. If you're going to be inside, Dan, the secret is cool and dry and lots of light. So that one window you have in a very cool room, that's where that actually should sit and enjoy it for a while. But then again, once all danger of frost is over, I would say probably mid-March, then it should be back outside where you can enjoy it for the summertime, or even a little bit later as well. But Nancy, that's a great question, and thanks for other people would be concerned about the same type of thing. So well done.
All right. Joanne joins us from Vancouver with a plum question for Brian. Go ahead, Joanne.
Hello, Brian. Thanks for taking the call. I have a damson plum that's about 2 years old. I'm growing it as an espalier, and I want to know when to prune it. I get conflicting information when I'm trying to read books about this.
Oh, that's surprising. Conflicting information in the gardening industry. I'm joking. The best thing I could say is sometimes there's more than one right answer. When I went with a group of growers many years ago to Europe, and we went to one greenhouse where the fellow did things this is the way it has to be done. He had a beautiful crop. His neighbor down the road, huge greenhouses, did exactly the opposite. They both had spectacular crops. So there's sometimes more than one right answer. But anytime between the end of November, when the leaves finally come off, until the beginning of March, that's your window for pruning. So you can do it anytime during that period. And I always choose a time that's nice to be outside as well. But the thing is, a couple things with plums to remember is in a tree, you want to open up the center, take the center out on a plum tree so more air and sunlight get in, and try and train your branches or prune them in a way that they grow horizontal. Upright vertical branches don't produce as much fruit as ones that grow sideways. So if you can prune them with that in mind, getting them more in a horizontal fashion, and again, thinning it out. We're sometimes too nice when we prune. We leave sort of everything, but choose your main structured branches, and then the branches that come off of that, you can train to go in a horizontal fashion. That's great. And Joanne, we never make mistakes. If we make a mistake in pruning, we learn from it. The plant will smarten us up. It'll show us how you do that. But in any case, great question. But anytime now that the weather's nice, let's get out and get the damson plums pruned.
Joanne, thanks so much.
Can I summer prune?
Oh, okay. She slipped it in. Summer prune as well?
Yes, a lot of folks don't realize that. We get when we do prune, we cause a lot more growth within the tree to just sprout up, and that sucker growth, for example, you should be taken out in the summertime when you can get into the tree and thin it out and clean it out. It just makes for a better, healthier tree when you do that. Good question,
Excellent.
Joe.
Thanks, Joanne.
Much,
appreciate it.
Bye.
And Brian, you're channeling Bob Ross there. We don't make mistakes. We have happy accidents.
Exactly.
There you go. Let's go to Marge in Quesnel. Marge, you're on with Brian.
Good afternoon, Brian. I'm so glad I got through.
No,
I
thank
took
you.
your advice. I had an amaryllis given to me last Christmas, and I heard you telling how you could bring it back to life for this Christmas. I put it outside in the summertime.
Well done.
It really got energized. When I brought it in, I waited a while and potted it, and it came out with six flowers where it had four last year, and it's also growing a second stem with a blossom end, and it looks like the bulb is growing, multiplying with another bulb on the side of it. It's just
I think, Marge, I think I'm going to start asking you how to grow things. I mean, this is amazing what you've done. That's incredible. I'm so glad to hear that.
Well, it's just been great. We thoroughly enjoyed it this winter.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah.
And
Marge,
it grew 28 inches tall. 28
2 thumbs
inches
up.
tall.
Marge,
That's
thank
incredible.
you. Marge, thank you so much. Forgive me for diving in there. We're going to get to a couple more calls now. David joins us in Nanaimo. He's got some apple trouble, Brian. It's one of my favorites, too. Go ahead, David.
Good.
Hello, Brian.
Hi.
Hi. I've called you about this before. Long ago, I called you about my Honeycrisp having little brown spots in the apple. And you said you'd heard from a grower in the Okanagan of what the chemical deficiency was. And I've forgotten what I need to add.
You know, that's a very, very good question. And I wouldn't be surprised, David, this year with the rainfall we got in late May, it caused so many problems on apple trees and fruit. There's actually a grower in Abbotsford who pretty much lost his entire crop. So it is a problem. But a grower from Linden who listens to CBC in our program phoned me years ago, and he said, Brian, please tell folks that over the wintertime, and earlier in the winter, the better, but 5 pounds of lime around your apple trees, around the drip line to the perimeter tree. Put 5 pounds of lime. And then when you see growth beginning in the spring, we always recommend something that's organic. And we like the 10, 15, 19 as being one of the most effective. So in terms of nutrient and preventing deficiencies, that's probably the best way to go. But David, the other thing too is remember with all the diseases, we do have to do a spring spraying, and it doesn't have to be, chemical spraying. We can do organics. I would put the lime sulfur with the would probably be my one to use at the growing season ratio, but you spray 3 times. You spray when the buds first start showing color. We call it the pinking stage. You wait until the blossoms have come out and opened, completely finished on the ground. You spray a second time, and then 3 to 5 weeks later. And you'll control by using permethrin and a sulfur spray. It will really help control a lot of the fungal diseases that will happen a little bit later on. So pinking stage, petal fall, 3 to 5 weeks later. And David, I really hope that will help you.
David,
Well, I appreciate that.
David, thank you so much. I have to jump in. We have another email that's another message, and it's also with fruit. Trajan from Passmore wants to know, Brian, they're having an unusually warm start to their winter, and our peach tree is showing signs of budding. Is there any hope of saving the harvest this year?
Oh, absolutely. And again, a lot of greenhouse crops this year are coming earlier than normally because, normally we have to, heat the greenhouses. Now we're cooling them. And that's not an unusual thing. No, we want to keep our fingers crossed, Dan. The secret is to make sure that we don't get a severe cold spell because the trees are soft, the buds are soft. That's the only thing I'd be worrying about. But no, this happens in nature, and it is an early year, but I see no reason at all. The only thing we need to watch out for, and you may have to do some yourself, if the buds open and we basically don't have a lot of pollinators around because it's too early for them, you're going to have to do something about pollinating some of the flowers yourself. And there are all kinds of ways you can put protection on if we do get a chill, insulate and other things go around just to protect the open blossoms. But no, I think, barring a cold spell, everything's going to be absolutely fine.
Back to the calls now. Thank you, Trajan. Marianne in Maple Bay, you're on with Brian.
Hi, Brian. I have a question about 3 rhodos that I have. I have quite a large rhodo bed, but in one corner that's about 12 by 12, I've got 3 of them that are turning brown on their leaves. They're about 5 feet high, and they've been vigorous in the past and trying to send out new growth from the bottom and some buds. But I'm just at a loss as to why this is in one corner of the garden. It's under a chestnut tree. And just wondering if that's...
Okay, really good question. And reminding everybody, rhododendrons are not all the same hardiness. We have H1, H2, and H3. The H3 varieties are more tender. So the winters we had the past 2 years really did a lot of damage to many of the rhodos. It takes them a couple years to recover. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing is the hot, dry, that we're getting more intense heat in the summertime, not the rhodo's favorite thing. So what I would do is make sure I mulch around the rhodos right now. I put 2 or 3 inches of mulch. I prefer bark mulch, fir hemlock bark mulch around the rhodos, protect those roots and hold that moisture in the summertime. And if we do happen to get an outflow wind, we have a product called Insulate that everybody has right now. You put that around the tree where the direction of the winds to kind of soften them. But here's the secret. Feed them with a good rhodo food in the spring, and maybe you do it twice. You do it when they start to show signs of life, and then about 12 weeks later. But the secret is when all the blossoms are finished and the new growth is beginning, if the plant doesn't look as good as it should, you're going to prune it. Prune it actually reasonably hard because it'll flush out all kinds of new growth. It may mean you may not have many blooms the next year as you would think, but it'll improve the plant. The leaves that come out will be good, and it'll certainly overall revive the plant. So please do that when the new growth comes in the spring, a really good pruning.
So leave the branches that have the dead leaves on them right now, or can I cut the dead?
No, please, that's a good question. Please get rid of the evidence, okay? Cut the dead leaves off anytime, because the neighbors say, oh, look at that, dead leaves. No, get rid of them right away, okay?
Yes.
Thank you so much for the call, Marianne. We really appreciate it. We're right to time. Nancy in Revelstoke, please stay on the line, and we'll get you an answer to Brian for your question. Brian Minter, our BC Today gardening columnist. Always a pleasure. Happy New Year, sir.
Thank you, Dan.
And that is it for our show. Thank you for calling in and joining the discussion. You can always email us, and many of you did. We appreciate it. BCtoday@cbc.ca.